welcome to Piano Shack with me, Woody. The HYDRASYNTH has been with us now for about 6 weeks, I suppose, so I think it's time to do a first impressions review. Full disclosure, I want you to know that ASM sent this one over for me to do some demonstrations and reviews, so I do have a relationship with the brand. That's something that you need to keep in mind. Okay, what have we done with this since getting it 6 weeks ago? Well, I've done the first video with the unboxing, first impressions and some demos. Then we've done sound demos of the single sounds and the multi-sounds. This is the HYDRASYNTH Deluxe, so it has 2 sound engines. You can do splits and layers. To see how this does for vintage analog sounds and some FM sounds, I did a recreation of Axel F by Harold Faltermeyer. I thought it came out pretty good and many of you enjoyed. For that recreation, I did actually create some of the sounds, or many of the sounds, by scratch using the front panel controls, so I can share with you how that worked out for me. But I'll be the first to admit I have a lot to learn. This is a deep and complicated synthesizer with a lot of features, and I've only really scratched the surface so far, but I thought you might enjoy hearing what I think of this so far anyway. Okay, the first thing, the most striking thing about this perhaps, and it never gets old, is the fantastic, extremely nice build quality of this thing. It's constructed with solid, thick sheet metal all around. It weighs a lot, which I think is a great thing, because it's pretty solid and sturdy when you have it in your studio. Just the fit and finish is fantastic. The feel of the knobs, the controls, so satisfying and enjoyable to use, as are these big buttons. When you click them, it just feels so good. Top marks for this. It reminds me of the synths I had from the 80s, you know, the early DX7, D50, M1. This is certainly in that league. I haven't seen a synthesizer built this nicely for years. Yeah, just these wheels just feel so nice to operate. Just the perfect amount of resistance. You can tell that the designers of this have put so much thought into how it feels, the tactile interaction you get when you're using this thing. It's top notch. The only thing that slightly lets the side down is the wall wart that we have in the wall there. For an instrument of this price and this quality, it would have been nice to get the conventional IEC kettle lead, which are just a little bit stronger and more rugged, I feel. Another really nice feature, again an example of attention to detail and thoughtfulness. I haven't seen this on any other synths, but it should be standard, is that laptop shelf. that you can screw onto the back of the keyboard. We have this lovely panel here, which is a nice area to put a groove box, drum machine, or a laptop, and the shelf attaches on the back to make sure that it doesn't fall over backwards. Yeah, what a great idea. And again, that thing is constructed with really thick 3 or 4 millimeter sheet metal, and even that little component weighs quite a lot and is really solid. Okay, for the sound quality, obviously super important as well. And I remember the first time I powered this on and started playing the presets, I was absolutely gobsmacked. I was really blown away. I'm not exaggerating. Had my headphones on and just stepped through the first half dozen presets, and it was like, it really was like, wow, okay. I see what all the hype and fuss is about this thing, and I can understand why people love it. The sound was so crisp and crystal clear, and the stereo was fantastic, the effects were fantastic, and just the depth, the girth, and the punch of those sounds was so nice. Hopefully you were also able to hear that yourselves on the demos, but it's perhaps not quite exactly the same thing as plugging headphones directly into the device. And of course, when you start using the multi-sounds with layers and splits, it takes it to a whole new level, as I'm sure you were able to hear. The effects sound amazing, as I've already said. I like that you have reverb and delay, dedicated buttons for those, and you can apply chorus, phases, flanges and so on before or after the reverb and the delay, which is really nice. And what I really appreciated when doing some sound programming, you can just call up a chorus and all the init settings, the default settings for the chorus, just sound fantastic, exactly where you want it to be. So I found when I was doing Axel F, just adding a chorus, I didn't need to do any tweaks to the chorus settings for it to sound fantastic, which is a bit of a time saver. The same thing applies for the delay and the reverb. Just add it to the chain and the default settings work really well in the majority of cases. Okay, user interface is hugely important when you're operating the synthesizer or programming your own sounds. This synthesizer has received a lot of praise for the design of the user interface, and I wholeheartedly agree. So, whilst it's not a knob per function, you do have these 8 macro controls that map to whichever module you happen to be editing at the time. And a module could be one of the oscillators, the mixer, one of the 5 envelopes, the 5 LFOs, the filter, effects, so on and so on. And the way it works here is you just have the whole architecture of the synth laid out here. Go and watch my unboxing video for a demonstration of this. You press the module you want to edit, and then the controls are mapped to these 8 knobs here. In some cases there are multiple pages of parameters, but the most important ones are always on page 1. And you very quickly memorize the locations and the purposes of all of these knobs, and you never really even have to stare at the screens. So if, for example, you want to adjust the filter envelope, just press the corresponding button here on the architecture, and then you have attack, decay, sustain, release right here. And you can see at a glance the current settings due to the LED collars that we have around the knobs. No peering at these very small, I have to say, LCD displays. LCD displays, LCDs. And that approach is the same for all of the modules. I've quickly figured out where the important controls are for the oscillators, the filters, and so on and so on. I haven't really got around to using the arpeggios yet, but as I said, this is a complicated synth and I'm just happy to learn a new feature every week or so. I'm old, my brain can't handle this stuff. Yeah, we haven't even started looking into the modulation matrix yet, oh my gosh. Yeah, the architecture is pretty straightforward. Even an old dog like me can understand it. 3 oscillators that you can mix. You pass it through 2 filters, and then there are 5 envelopes. I'm looking here, 5 LFOs and an effects section as well. You can also apply various processing to the oscillators, these, what do they call them? Mutators, to get FM and sync them and all this kind of stuff. A couple of strange things that I noticed. I wanted to disable the second filter just to keep it simple for some of the patches I was creating. I couldn't see a way to do that actually. It's always there, either in parallel or in series, but you can adjust the cutoff so it has no effect on the sound. But I was expecting some way to be able to disable that from the chain completely, but not that I could find. I have done some doorless jamming together with the Machine Plus on the laptop stand over there, and that worked really good. One thing you have to do is set up the clocks, and in that case I set up the Machine Plus to transmit MIDI clock and this one to receive MIDI clock, and that way they both sync up with each other on the tempo, which worked out really well. A couple of things on the connectivity then. When we unboxed this, I was a little bit uncertain if it supported audio over USB. Now I've realized after reading the manual and some forums, this only supports MIDI over USB, not audio, so you will have to use the analog line outputs and some kind of capture device to record the audio. Okay, one of the big selling points for this is the polyphonic aftertouch, of course. You can hold down a chord and then trigger aftertouch just on one note of the chord. For example, that's one way to use it. And I haven't found myself using that feature very much at all. It's there, and when I remember to use it, yeah, it's really cool. It's very impressive. And a kind of wow factor when you start doing that. But in my general playing, I hardly ever remember to use it. In fact, I don't even really use Aftertouch very much. I'm not an Aftertouch guy. I wasn't brought up performing on synths with Aftertouch, so it doesn't really come super naturally for me, but it's there and it does work very well. One thing I will say about the Aftertouch in general, I found out of the box, I didn't really like the response, the curve of the Aftertouch. It would activate a little bit too abruptly, perhaps, as you started leaning into the keys. But there are, in fact, a whole page of settings related to the Aftertouch response and the curves and how quickly it activates. And I've been trying to tweak that, but I still haven't really dialed it in exactly how I want either. So there's a bit more work for me to do there. But just to be aware, there are a load of settings for that if you don't find the Aftertouch curves to be to your liking. The same thing goes, unfortunately, for this magnificent ribbon strip that we have here. I haven't found myself using it. Often when I'm playing, I'm using two hands, I guess. So that doesn't really leave anything free to operate this ribbon controller, which is a shame. It's not really in my muscle memory. I need to really learn how to apply this to my playing. Right now, again, I didn't grow up with ribbon controllers. I'm more used to grabbing a knob and adjusting the sounds in real time as I'm performing. In fact, the modulation wheel does some really interesting things on many of the patterns as well. But this is really the creme de la creme of controllers, so I need to train myself to use it more, I think. Okay, as I said earlier, this is the Deluxe, a slightly large, well, a much larger form factor actually, with, is it 76 or 73 keys? I don't quite remember, and the dual architecture, so you can have splits or layers, but it is a much bigger form factor than the regular HYDRASYNTH with 49 keys. And I'm still not quite sure if I perhaps would have preferred that one. Yes, it's lovely to have these multis, the extra space, somewhere to put your groove box as well. But I'm thinking what I'm really needing or looking for or wanting here is ideally an upper tier keyboard. I could put the Genos that we currently have on the bottom and use HYDRASYNTH 49 as like my lead board for doing leads, pads or extra sounds. This doesn't really work as an upper tier board because it's so big. I really do like, for synthesizer kind of synths, I love the 49 note form factor, just like the Nord lead, for example. That's my favorite size of a synth keyboard. So I'm wondering if perhaps that's the one I should have got in. I'm not sure. Still a bit on the fence about that, but it's something I'm pondering over. So if you're making a similar kind of decision, think very carefully about which of the models in the lineup you want. But yes, isn't it great that we have choice? There's this one, the Deluxe, then there's the regular 49, the keyboard version that came out first. There's also a desktop module and the Explorer with mini keys and a very compact form factor. Okay, my wish list then. No synthesizer is perfect, and there's a few things that would be nice. Enhancements really, there's no problems to mention really here, but enhancements or improvements for the HYDRASYNTH 2. Firstly, on the standard model, you get 8-note polyphony. This one has 16 because of the dual architecture. That doesn't seem a lot for digital synths. You know, again, referring to the Nord, that has 24-note poly, I think. And, you know, it's all digital, so you don't need to buy extra VCOs or anything like that. It's all just algorithms running on a chip. To get more polyphony, then you need to have more powerful CPUs or more efficient algorithms, or this is my suggestion actually, perhaps some kind of light mode, some light oscillator mode that doesn't require as much processing, so you could get, instead of the 8-note polyphony, 16, 24 or 32, which I think would make a big difference for a lot of guys that are performing on these. There'd have to be some kind of trade-off, of course. The light mode of the oscillators might introduce a little bit of aliasing, or perhaps not the high resolution, or whatever it might be. But yeah, some kind of oscillator light, L-I-T-E, light mode, I think would be pretty cool. Again, sorry to harp on about the Nord lead, but that's been my virtual analog of choice for decades. This thing, keep in mind, is more than a virtual analog. It does all of that admirably. I'll try and remember to talk about that in a second. It's more than a virtual analog because it has this real powerful wavetable synthesis as well. But the Nord lead, as standard, offers 4-part multi-timbrality. It's 4-part multi-timbral. You can have 4 different slots and layer and split them how you want to. And the other advantage, that makes it a really powerful unit for sequencing or doorless jammings. You can have 4 different synth sounds going on at the same time, controlled by your sequencer. And I think that's awesome. But here, in this case, on the Deluxe, we have 2 parts, but on the standard HYDRASYNTH, it's just 1 part, multi-timbral, 1 sound at a time. In the HYDRASYNTH 2, wouldn't it be awesome to have 4 sounds at the same time? Yeah. We can hope. That would kind of make it the only one synth you ever need. I mean, you can use the one keyboard to do your bass, pads, plucks, and a lead sound. Combine that with the drum machine and you're good to go. Yeah, okay, when you dive into the voice mode, there's some really interesting parameters that really do set this apart as a virtual analog, something that's trying to recreate the old analog synths of yesteryear. Things like there's an analog mode that just, it's either on or off, but it just fattens up the bottom, makes it seem a little bit warm, a little bit less crisp and hi-fi, perhaps. That's really nice. There's also, I forget the exact name of the parameter, but there's also a vintage analog feel control that you can dial up between 0 and 127, and that introduces a little bit of instability in the oscillator tuning and less precision in the envelope curves and so on. And that works really well. I used that to good effect in my Axel F cover. You can also configure if you want the oscillators to trigger in sync with each other every time you hit a note, or if you want them to drift, like you would have got, for example, on the Prophet 5. And that reminds me a little bit about my next topic. What are my plans for this one going ahead? I had this crazy idea of recreating the, I think it's 40 original factory presets on the Prophet 5, you know, that late 70s classic analog 5-voice polysynth. So I'm going to have a crack at that. I know that the architecture will support that, and I think it will sound quite good as well. I think it would be quite nice to have that bank of 40 patches from the Prophet 5. Maybe some of you have already done it. In that case, spare me a lot of time and share that with me. Or if you fancy having a crack at it yourself, do keep in touch with me. That would be interesting to hear how you get on. But I think that would be a fun challenge and a way for me to really learn the ins and outs of the synthesizer architecture here. Yeah, obviously this is overkill to recreate the sounds of the Prophet 5. But for me, it just seemed like a fun challenge and a good way to learn more about the instrument. And yeah, who doesn't love the factory presets of the Prophet 5? And yeah, my other goals in the coming months are to just learn the rest of the synthesizer features. I haven't dug into the modulation routing or the modulation matrix or the wavetable stuff yet, but we'll get to that eventually. Small baby steps, one step at a time. Let's learn to walk before we run and all that kind of stuff. Reading the comments, one thing that struck me is that so many of you already have the HYDRASYNTH or are planning on buying it. It seems to be an extremely popular choice, and the critique and the feedback on this synth from the owners is overwhelmingly positive, and that just goes to show what a good job ASM have done with the design, the construction and the implementation of this synthesizer. Yeah, an amazing job. It's hard to find a negative post or comment about this synthesizer, which is just really unusual in this day and age, as you know. Okay, so that's all I had to say at the moment. I just wanted to put you in the picture of where I am with this and what my plans are. We're just getting started, really. We've got a long journey ahead. I hope you'll join me for that. If you like the video, please consider subscribing, and thank you so much if you already have. I'll see you again next time. Cheerio.